90 feet above a river, a green delivery truck sat alone at the end of the world. In front of it, the road simply stopped, sheared off in a clean, impossible line, the asphalt hanging in the rain over a drop into nothing. The driver had braked in the last few meters of solid ground he would ever have. Behind that truck, where 6 lanes of motorway had carried holiday traffic a minute earlier, there was only sky and falling water and 200 meters of missing bridge. It was the 14th of August, 2018, in Genoa, Italy, and a highway that a nation had driven across every day for half a century had just come apart in the middle of a rainstorm. 43 people went down with it. The terrible thing about the Morandi Bridge is not that no one saw it coming. It is that they did. The morning had been ordinary in the way that only the mornings before disasters are. It was the eve of Ferragosto, the great Italian summer holiday, and the bridge over the Polcevera Valley was full of people going somewhere good. Families heading down to the Riviera beaches, a group of young travelers from France on their way to a music festival, a couple bringing their children home the long way from a honeymoon. The bridge they were crossing was a landmark, opened in 1967, a bold sweep of concrete towers and cables that locals had simply always known. To the drivers on it that morning, it was not a risk. It was the road. It was the way you got to the sea. At 36 minutes past 11, in driving rain, one of the great concrete-wrapped support cables inside the bridge's 9th tower gave way, and the tower it held came down, and the road came with it. From the ground below, witnesses said the sound was not a crash. It was a roar, and then a silence, and then the rain. To understand why it fell, you have to look at how it was built. The Morandi was a daring design for its time, a cable-stayed bridge where the steel cables that did the holding were sheathed in concrete, wrapped up inside the structure itself. It looked elegant and permanent, but that concrete sleeve, meant to protect the steel, did something its designer never fully reckoned with. It hid the steel. For 51 years, the salt air off the sea and the fumes of the industrial valley below worked at those cables where no inspector could see them, rusting the metal from the inside while the surface looked sound. A bridge is only as strong as the cables you cannot look at, and by the 2010s, the cables you could not look at were, according to the engineers who later studied them, badly corroded. One set of stays estimated to have lost as much as a fifth of its strength. The flaw was not a mystery waiting to be discovered. It was a measurement, sitting in reports, waiting to be acted on. And this is where a tragedy becomes something harder to forgive. The bridge belonged to a private company, Autostrade, the operator that collected the tolls from every car that crossed and was responsible, in return, for keeping the crossing safe. As early as 2012, a report the company itself commissioned warned of decay in the structure and raised the prospect of serious trouble within years. In the months before the collapse, expert analysis put a number on the danger in the 9th tower. A full repair of that tower had been discussed and studied and not finished. And in all that time, prosecutors would later argue, no one did the simple, humble things that buy safety while you wait. No closing of lanes, no diverting of the heavy trucks, no lowering of the speed, no shutting of the bridge. To do those things would have meant traffic and complaints and cost on one of the busiest roads in the country. So the tolls kept being collected and the cars kept crossing over a tower that the paperwork already described as sick. The prosecution's case, which the court would come to accept at the first trial, was blunt. They knew, and they managed the risk as a budget line instead of a danger. When the tower let go, It did not give a warning of its own. There was no groan, no sway, no time to stop the cars already on the span. Whole vehicles fell the full height of the bridge into the riverbed and the rail yards and the rooftops below. Rescuers worked for days in the wreckage, with dogs and with their hands, pulling out survivors, and then, one after another, the dead. 43 people. Among them was a family from Genoa itself, a woman named Claudia, 47 years old, her husband and her 2 children, 12 and 16. They had been in one car. The children's father, who had not been with them, would survive to bury all of them at once. At the state funeral in a great exhibition hall 4 days later, some of the coffins were small, and some of the families refused to come at all, because to them a state funeral was an embrace from the same authorities they blamed for the empty chairs, and they would not accept it. Claudia's sister, Egle Posetti, did not look away, and she did not go quiet. She became the voice of the families, the one who stood before the cameras, who went to the hearings, who kept account of the promises made and not kept. The trial that followed was one of the largest in modern Italian history. 57 defendants, company executives, and government inspectors and ministry officials, and years of testimony about cables and concrete and inspection reports. It took nearly 8 years to reach a verdict, and on the 16th of July, 2026, in a courtroom in Genoa, packed with the people who had lost someone, the judges read it out. Around 30 defendants convicted. The former chief executive of the highway company sentenced to 12 years. Relatives broke down as the sentences were spoken. Egle Posetti called it a first stage, a ray of light, and said the point had never been revenge, only this, to name precisely who at the top had been responsible. The defense said their client was a scapegoat and announced they would appeal, which is their right. Under Italian law, the verdict is a first word, not a last one. The reckoning reached past the courtroom too. The company that had held the bridge was no ordinary contractor. Autostrade per l'Italia ran thousands of kilometers of the country's motorways, and it belonged, through a holding company, to one of Italy's wealthiest industrial families. The same tolls that had crossed that bridge every day flowed up into one of the great private fortunes in Europe. In the fury after the collapse, that arrangement itself went on trial in the court of public opinion. How had the safety of a public road, used by everyone, become a line item on a private balance sheet answerable to shareholders? The government moved to strip the family of the concession, and after years of pressure, control of the motorway network passed to a state-led group. The bridge had fallen for many reasons, corrosion and rain, and a tower past its span. But underneath all of them sat a quieter one. A road that belonged to the public had been run, for profit, by people who were far away when it came down. While the courts moved at the speed of courts, the city did something faster. It could not live with a wound across its middle, so it tore down what was left of the Morandi. The stumps and the surviving towers brought down in a controlled blast in the summer of 2020. And it built again. A celebrated architect from Genoa itself offered a design, a spare and pale new bridge meant to feel like a ship, or the hull of one, moving over the valley. It rose in barely a year. By August of 2020, 2 years after the collapse, traffic crossed the Polcevera again on a new road, lit at night by lamps meant to burn like the lights of a vessel at sea, 43 of them in some tellings, one for each of the dead. The valley had its crossing back. What it could not get back was the 14th of August, or the people who had trusted the old bridge to simply hold the way you trust the ground. There is a temptation with a story like this to file it under Italy, or under old, or under somewhere else. That is the comfortable reading, and it is the wrong one. The Morandi was not a crumbling relic in a poor country. It was a working motorway bridge in a wealthy one, carrying ordinary traffic on an ordinary day, and it failed because a known, written down, measured danger was treated as a cost to postpone rather than a life to protect. Across the wealthy world, the same arithmetic is running quietly right now. In the United States alone, engineers count more than 200,000 bridges that need repair or replacement, each one a small deferred decision. Most of those decisions will be fine. The Morandi is what it looks like when one of them is not. A bridge does not fall because a nation cannot build one. It falls because keeping the old one honest was easier to put off than to pay for. But the postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.